Hello, dear friends. We already started section third, script writing for radio and television, in my previous video. We have already seen brief introduction of script writing for radio and television. You know how to write a newspaper report for the print media. You know very well that there is a print media and electronic media. All these generally reporters we see in the society, they are related to print media. So the reporters are related to print media. We generally see very few reporters related to electronic media, because all these things, mice and recording material, like camera, video camera, these all things are required for the reporter of electronic media. Let us first know the difference in writing news for newspaper and writing news for a radio broadcast. There are some points given here on page number 151. If you go on the page, you will come to know the differences between writing news for the newspaper and writing news for the radio. The first and foremost difference is news in the newspaper is meant for silent reading. Silent reading. The person who purchases a newspaper from the newspaper stall and go to home, sometimes newspaper are always there at the door of our house early in the morning, and we take the newspaper and start to read silently. Nobody is going to read loudly the newspaper. While in radio broadcast, news broadcast on the radio is intended to be heard. We switch on the radio, increase the level of sound, and we generally hear the news, or sometimes we like to hear songs on radio. Here in the print media, news for the newspapers, you just read silently. But this is not possible in the radio. You have to hear loudly. Second difference is the news items in the newspaper are divided into headlines, lead, and the main points. The news items in the newspaper are divided into headlines. First of all, headline is there on the top. Then there is lead and the main points. The news leads you towards the important and main points. While in radio news begins with the headlines followed by detailed news. If you heard the news on radio, some important news are highlighted at the beginning of the news on radio. and all the detailed news is properly explored by the anchor. You just heard the headlines on the radio, you will come to know the total content of the news in a very brief way. Not necessary to listen 10 or 15 minutes whole news. If you want to listen detailed news about cricket match or who won the cricket match, so all the details, who was the man of the match and who was the man of the series and which country won the match. So if you want to listen all the details about the match, then you will have to listen the news on radio carefully. But you have to listen. You can't read silently the news like newspaper on radio. Third major difference is the headlines can be in complete sentence with omission of articles in the newspaper. Many times you just glance at the headlines of the newspaper, you will come to know that there are abstract sentences or the phrases or the words are used for the headline. Sometimes there is no article, sometimes there is no verb also in the sentence. It is omitted when you create a headline for the newspaper. But this is not possible on radio news because the headlines must be in complete sentence on radio. Unless and until you utter the complete sentence, how the reader, audience, will come to know the exact meaning of the lines uttered by you. So you have to utter full sentence. Though it is a headline, you have to mention clearly the headline in a complete sentence. The same case is not happened generally in the newspaper. Sometimes the articles or the headlines are without articles, without verbs, without decorative words like adjectives and adverbs. This is possible in the newspaper, but this is not possible in the radio, in the news of radio. Then the fourth important factor which discriminates news for the newspaper and news for the radio is the reader can go back to the news report if he or she has missed or failed to understand or grasp the matter. It is just like book reading. You take a newspaper in your hand, you just try to read it, and if you don't understand in the first reading, you can reread the same news for better understanding. You can reread the same news for better understanding, and this is possible in the newspaper. But it is not possible in the news of a radio. Once you missed the content of a particular news, Once you are unable to listen properly the particular news on radio, this is not possible to heard once again the same news in the same news span. So ephemeral nature of the oral message on radio, the details of the news read on radio are not repeated. Only the important headlines are repeated at the end of the news. If the listener fails to listen any news, it is difficult to retrieve the point missed. Understood? In the newspaper, you are able to reread the news again and again if you don't understand the particular news. But this is not possible in the case of news on radio, because headlines are told only twice, at the beginning and at the end, and in the headlines all the content of the news is not covered. If you miss the particular content or details of the particular news while hearing the news on radio, you will not be able to listen once again the same content of the news on a radio news. So this is not possible. So this is the basic difference. The last point is, last point of this video. There are more points indicating difference between news for the newspapers and news for the radio. The use of lengthy sentences in the news reports may not make any significant difference to the reader. While on news for the radio, the announcer has to read the news with appropriate speed using short words and simple sentences. Basic difference. If you read the newspaper, it doesn't matter that how much long sentence is there. You can understand. If you don't understand, you can reread it. This is possible in the newspaper, but this is not possible in the news on the radio. That announcer has to utter the words in a particular proper speed by using small sentences and by using small and understandable words to the listener. This is the basic difference. You cannot make ambiguous sentences, complicated sentences while or reading the particular news on radio, because it directly affects on the mind of, or on the audience who hear the news. So there are few more differences. We have seen just 5 differences that will help you. What is the basic difference between news for the newspapers and news for the radio? We will see remaining part of this point in my next video. Till then, thank you very much.